everyone, and welcome to today's Charity Recruit virtual boardroom. It's so lovely to see so many familiar faces and names, actually. And I think we've even got some of our previous presenters on today, which is really nice. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Emily Formby. I'm a divisional director here at Charity Recruit. And as I say, thanks all for joining. Firstly, on what is probably one of the hottest days of the year so far. So thanks for taking the time out of your lunch break to be with us. I think from my point of view, it's days like this where I wish I was back in the office with the air conditioning on. So we've had a really great response to today's session, and I know that Razia is going to do a great job of talking to us all around today. Around today's issues. So for those of you that haven't joined one of our boardrooms previously, these sessions are designed to bring together sector expertise to charity leaders and share practical insights, encourage discussion, and create an environment where we can learn from one another. Razia works as the Director of Internal Audit at Bishop Fleming. She works with all their charity and not-for-profit organisations to strengthen governance, improve assurance, and help boards gain greater confidence in their oversight and decision-making. So she's got a wealth of experience to share with you today. Before I hand over, just a quick word about Charity Recruit. As many of you know, we are specialist recruiters in the charity not-for-profit sector, and we work with organisations across all their leadership functions. You'll know that these boardrooms aren't a sales event, and they never have been. We run them because we genuinely believe that bringing sector leaders together to share knowledge and expertise can benefit everybody. Obviously, if we can support you with your recruitment plans or leadership appointments in the future, we'd be delighted to have a conversation. So with that in mind, I'd love to welcome Razia.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'll just quickly share my screen. Just bear with me just a moment. And we'll get into the presentation. But yeah, like Emily says, it's great. We've got so many on the call today, especially obviously with the weather the way it is. So thank you ever so much. And it's nice to see cameras on as well, because you don't normally see cameras on these kind of events. So thank you again. Let me just share my screen. Just bear with me just 1 second. Can everybody see that okay? Just a thumbs up or a nod, or yeah, fantastic. Okay, so all I'm going to do today is literally try and take you through my sort of experience working within the charity sector, but also trying to bring this this topic off the page, really, just to give you a bit of practical sort of insights in terms of how good governance could work within your sector. Emily's done a really good intro in terms of a little bit of my background and a little bit of Bishop Fleming. So some of you might have heard of Bishop Fleming before, you may not have. We are a professional services firm, and we offer internal audit, external audit, advisory, tax, all the usual sort of sector sort of relevant areas of support that you'd expect. For myself personally, I've been within internal audit and risk management for about 18 years now, all within sort of predominantly within industry, but also within the professional services firm. But from my perspective, just working with clients and building up relationships, just from a learning perspective, I think is really valuable, because I'm learning as much as the people that I'm talking to on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's really valuable in that sense, that where we find areas of sort of concern or risks in focus, just allowing people to have an open conversation in terms of what actually worries them sort of helps sort of shape some of the conversations and helps guide some of the decision making, I suppose. So I think this session itself hopefully will demonstrate some of that as well. So it's not a case of, like Emily says, we're not trying to sell you anything here. It's literally a learning environment where I can share some of the experiences I've had working on the ground in terms of from an industry perspective, and also from where I've seen issues with clients, but also practically how do we then sort of control that going forward, and looking to see how we can strengthen our governance practices. So just in terms of, and just apologies straight off, I speak really fast, so if anybody needs me to slow down, just shout. It's probably a bit of a nervous thing, but it's like I feel like I always try and rattle through things really quickly as well. It's just a characteristic, so apologies for that. But I suppose, why does governance matter now? So there's lots of different reasons why governance matters, and obviously it's best practice that governance is in place in any sector. So it's not just the charity sector that is worried about what governance looks like. It's sector agnostic. So but from a charity point, there's increased regulatory scrutiny around, well, what are individuals doing in a governance space? So we need to demonstrate more and more that we do have good governance in place. It is evidenced, and it's not just a tick box exercise. It's not something that we've just done once. It has to be a repeatable process, and it has to be consistently applied. So whilst your individual sort of organisations will be on different journeys in terms of what governance looks like, it is more and more asked for in terms of, so what are you actually doing? And that's why it sort of matters more and more as well. There's an increased sort of fraud element that sort of gets badged to governance. So individuals and people that provide you with the funds, so your public who actually donate to the different charities, will want that confidence that basically the funds that you've been provided with do actually go to the areas that they were designated to go to, and there isn't something happening behind the scenes where monies are just being used for things that they shouldn't be, basically. And there is more and more, and I'll go into a little bit more detail into this. If you've got an internal audit function, or you've got a co-source, outsourced internal audit sort of provider, they need to be able to also demonstrate to you that they are now putting that fraud lens on every area that they're actually reviewing as part of the internal audit process. As you can imagine, cost of living crisis has impacted everybody. Funding stability pressures are very real in the charity sector. So it's being able to demonstrate as well how you can make those funds go further. You're probably getting less, but your vision and your objectives probably have stayed the same. So it's understanding how you're going to use that funding and how you're going to sort of manage that risk of sustaining that funding and ensuring that the governance around that is well controlled. So I touched on it a little bit already, but the public trust and reputational risk in terms of governance failures. So if you are found to be using funding, or if you can't demonstrate that the money that you're sort of getting from a charity point is being used in the right way, you will ultimately lose that public trust, and it will impact your reputational risk. And overall, the most sort of important piece of all of this, and as we go through, trustees are accountable. So whilst you can actually disseminate certain areas of control or actions that individuals across the organisation might be responsible for, the trustees are accountable, and they need to be confident that the governance is in place, and it's pragmatic. So not one size fits all. You've got small charities, you've got large charities, you've got global charities that work on very different sort of risk basis, but the trustees need to understand that what's been put in place fits your individual organisation. And just that sort of parting line at the bottom, it's no longer assumed. Good governance is no longer assumed. It has to be visible. You have to be able to demonstrate it. It's almost like comply or explain sort of situation. And like I said, it has to be proportionate to yourselves. So that was just sort of like opening up in terms of what we're going to cover off today. So as part of this session, hopefully, we're covering off these 4 key points here. So the key themes from the sector relating to governance, sort of bringing that off the page, how governance is integrated across the 3 lines. And I'll talk a little bit about the 3 lines if people aren't sure what that is. But also, what is the board's role in governance? And then how an assurance framework can actually strengthen decision making and the practical application of that. And then we'll have some time, hopefully, at the end as well for Q&A. These slides obviously will be distributed out. So if there's anything that's like I'm not going to, these are just as a talking guide for me. I'm not going to bore you to death with each word off the PowerPoint. So this is just to give a little bit more context once you get the slides yourselves. But sort of the key themes across the sector that we're seeing at the moment. So financial controls oversight. So more and more, what we're finding is out-of-date sort of policies and procedures in relation to what is the requirement in terms of what your daily operations are. So whilst, from an internal audit and risk management point, first thing everyone will most likely say is, oh, we've got policy for that, or we've got procedure for that. Well, actually, what's been happening is policies and procedures are being created, but they're not being evolved in line with what how the organisation is actually evolving. They're out-of-date policies and procedures. They're on an intranet somewhere where someone hasn't really delved into, well, do we still do this? Have we still got the same system for this? And it sort of falls back into that insufficient sort of oversight from the trustee as well. So it's not just an organisation issue. Like, obviously the trustees and the board have responsibility for signing off those policies. I think more often than not, policies get presented, and because everyone's really busy and there's a packed audit and risk committee agenda, they're sort of seen but not seen, and we haven't really got the right challenge in terms of what those policies are actually doing for the organisation. And I touched on it sort of at the earlier point as well regarding fraud. There is a larger, unfortunately, and I think cost of living crisis has probably got a bit to do with this, but also just the accountability and oversight probably isn't as strict as it should be within some charities, and the fraud has increased. And what we're seeing there as well, because we haven't got that overall governance lens on what fraud could look like within the organisation, it hasn't been managed. And when we talk about fraud, we're not just talking about someone taking a charity donation out of a charity pot. We're talking about the wider organisation fraud. So you could have ghost employees on your payroll. You could have sort of expenses being paid that shouldn't be paid. So it's just general oversight in terms of what's happening in the organisation, as opposed to badging it purely on a bit of a donation has gone missing. So it is a lot wider than just looking at it from a monetary perspective in that sense. So more broadly, so conflicts of interest in related party transactions. So a lot of the times we'll find that the declarations for pecuniary interests just have not been declared, or they've not been kept up to date. There's not a real conflicts register in place, or it's an outdated conflicts register. So there's quite a lot happening where you haven't then got that independence in terms of when services are being procured, or where you've got individuals joining an organisation. There's too much of a personal connection between individuals, sort of in the invoicing side or purchase order side. So there's quite a lot that happens where we haven't seen an efficient or a more up-to-date process in terms of where people are actually declaring those interests. We're also finding more and more often value isn't being considered when things are being procured. So people will go out and source a supplier, but it's not necessarily the right supplier for the organisation. They've not gone through the full 3 quote process. They've not really discussed whether what they're getting is value for money, and will it actually provide the service and sort of support the organisation in what it actually needs. And it is a board level discussion based on some of the values that we're talking about. So that hasn't happened, and the trustees haven't had that full oversight in terms of what that looks like as well. So it's quite a big piece, and I guess with the charity organisation, especially when you're organising, say, a fundraising event, you might have individuals that will do things at no cost of all, but at the same time, a venue hire will still charge you for the event, the space itself, or the catering, and we haven't gone out and done the full evidence and value for money piece there. And not just from a charity sector perspective, but again, sector agnostic, board composition and skills, that seems to be a common theme across most sectors, but particularly in the charity sector, a lot of times we're finding obviously individuals that will give up their time on a voluntary basis, but the skills gap isn't quite there. Whilst people do offer their time up for free, we still need to be really considering, well, where is this person best placed in terms of how are they going to support the organisation? If they've got a skills gap, is there anything that we can do to help them sort of plug that gap, but also then be able to provide the proper challenge and the scrutiny at that board level? And a lot of organisations where you have, obviously, you've got individuals on the payroll, there's limited sort of succession planning and like a renewal process in terms of, well, what does that look like? And then sort of going into sort of like the board size structure, how regularly is that reviewed? Not very often. It sort of sits within that skills gap process and the succession planning process, but it's not reviewed often enough to understand, is this the right size? Do we need a separate committee to sort of look at this area with more detail and provide more of that challenge, and then feed into the board so they can have oversight and have a proper review in terms of what that looks like. Whereas we find sometimes everything gets clumped together and it's not an efficient use of time and it's not an effective use of time. Talking about this sort of 3 lines model, most of you on the call will know what this is, but it's really important to understand that governance does sit across these 3 lines, and boards should be using the 3 lines model for understanding where the accountability lies. You almost sort of mapping this out as a racy sort of model as well. So you're looking at who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted and who should be informed. But across those 3 lines, it's really important to understand the key sort of roles across each of those lines. So your functional departments will almost do that whole day-to-day first line compliance sort of checks. They will be the first individuals sort of to be applying your policies and procedures, but you'll have individual sort of compliance areas within those first line just to make sure that those policies are being adhered to. Your second line is where your sort of board and your trustees sit, so that's the organisational oversight. So your reporting from your first line should be going into your second line for review, challenge, sort of understanding. Say if you've got KPIs, KRIs across the sector that you're working towards, they would agree those, sign them off, etc. And then your third line is that independent assurance. So you've got your external auditors, you've got like internal audit would sit in that third line as well, whether that's an internal audit function internally or obviously your co-source, outsourced, but also like anything from an insurance perspective, anything that would come out and do like a health and safety sort of inspection, that kind of thing, that would sit in your third line. But it's really important to understand those 3 lines need to be working together to ensure that you've got coverage across all 3. Again, quite a text-heavy slide. I'm not going to talk like to each sentence here, but this is just to sort of demonstrate where you need to be looking for that assurance. And it is an integrated assurance plan that you should be looking at. The Institute of Internal Auditors have created their topical requirements, which any internal audit team would be looking at. And obviously, I'm talking about internal audit because that's where your governance sort of almost like you're getting that assurance from your audit side. But we need to be able to now demonstrate you've got governance and assurance across your cybersecurity, your third party, and your organisational behaviour. So in any sector, and particularly I suppose with the charity sector, where you may have hoax emails more often than not, in terms of from a you're probably more open to cyber threats and suspicious emails. But as part of that governance process, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've considered where your cyber vulnerabilities are, where your potential threats are, and how are you responding to those. Again, it's that reputational impact. Should that go wrong? Should your donor information get leaked? All of that stuff that you really need to be protecting, that sits in your cybersecurity box. But you need to be able to demonstrate you've considered where your sort of controls are, where you're getting your assurances from, that you've got a hold on your cyber areas. Third-party governance as well, that's quite a key area now. The Institute are basically saying as part of your internal audit profile, you need to be having clear view where your third-party assurance is coming from. Are you actually, sort of touching on my earlier point about value for money, do you actually know how your contracts are performing? Do you know how many contracts you actually have within an organisation? Are you doing the correct due diligence? You don't want to be, again, in the spotlight, in the news for engaging with a supplier that hasn't gone through a proper due diligence process, and they're doing things that don't agree with your values, and they've got issues in their supply chain where it's going to be a negative impact for you if that gets brought to anyone's attention. So it's really understanding who are you engaging with, who is the right organisation to be supporting you in terms of what you need, and that contingency planning as well, because you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You can't just expect one supplier to always be there. More and more organisations are going under due to cost pressures, etc. So are you having enough of a turnaround in terms of forward-looking planning of who your key suppliers are? And I suppose one of the biggest things we see within the sector, and now you need to be able to demonstrate as well, that the whole organisation is actually following the same policies, procedures, and the tone from the top is actually leading that behaviour. Often what we're seeing is you've got different things happening at an operational level, and what the board expectations are very different to what's actually happening on the ground, if that makes sense. There's a lot of tick box compliance type things happening where people feel, well, this is the right thing to do, as opposed to this is actually the right thing to do. And it's that ownership of risks and controls, and your behaviour as a board and a trustee, that is very visible to the rest of the organisation. So you almost have to lead by example. So if you create a policy and if you create a procedure, you have to really be the champions of that and make sure that is being followed, and you actually believe in your own policies and procedures, because that is the tone from the top and the leadership behaviour that trickles down to the rest of the organisation. It almost like, well, they're not doing it, so why should we? And that's not what we want to see. And you need to be able to demonstrate that you've got a really good culture within the organisation, and an honest culture, I suppose. So having a whistleblowing policy and a speak up line is great, but again, it comes down to, is that just a tick box, or do you genuinely have a true whistleblowing speak up culture where people feel that they can come forward with issues and concerns, because that's what will allow you to see where things don't work well and where things do work well. I just wanted to touch and sort of going to the point around lifting governance off the page and making it not a tick box. I just wanted to touch a little bit on risk management. So what you'll see here, I've sort of put together like a typical 5x5 matrix in terms of where individuals might sort of rank a risk, etc. And visually, everyone's familiar with this, and everyone will see, if a risk lands in the red space, or that's the danger zone, we need to do something about it. And if it's green, everyone's quite happy, and almost like they look past, well, it's green, so we don't really need to think about it. That's not really how risk management should work. And it's a case of having good governance in place allows you to really think behind, well, what do those numbers and colours actually mean? And often I've seen clients and organisations say, we don't want the colour. We can see it's a 1 to 25, but just strip the colour away, because once someone sees something red, that's it. That's all they focus on, and they don't want to see anything else. Whereas actually, it's looking behind how that's actually managed to get to where it is. What is the likelihood of this risk actually crystallising? And if it should crystallise, then what is that impact going to be? And you almost need to switch that mindset to how your governance processes work as well. So it's understanding, if we don't have this governance and controls looking across the three lines, what is the likelihood of somebody not following a policy or procedure, and what is the impact that's going to have, and what is the trickle effect that's going to happen then across the organisation? So I just wanted to put that in so as a visual, so you can sort of see where the next sort of slide's going to go. But boards need that confidence. They don't, I suppose, to that top bullet point there, it's not just information. So a lot of the times you'll find an audit and risk committee pack will go in, and you'll have like the top 10 risks go in, and they're the top 10 because they fall within that red amber space, but that's not giving them the real rationale as to why those risks have fallen where they've fallen. And it's the mechanisms behind this that are really important. and demonstrating that good governance is actually in operation. This is what a typical risk assurance mapping piece would look like. So I've just created two random sort of risks here, but obviously relevant to the charity sector. The first one is your funding concentration, and the next one is your cybersecurity and data breach. How a risk assurance mapping exercise would work is you would take your top strategic risks and go through, for each of those risks, what is the control designed to do. So as you're talking to your key sort of stakeholders from a risk management point, and you're looking at an individual risk, often what I find is that the risk owner doesn't actually know what controls fall underneath that risk. They'll say, oh, it's my risk, but someone else owns the controls. Straight away, that's a little bit of a red flag, because if you own the risk, surely you should know what controls lie underneath that risk. And if you're scoring it a red, why have you scored it a red? Or even if it's an amber or green, why are you scoring it the way you've scored it if you don't really know which controls lie underneath that? So the point around the mapping is getting the risk owner to actually talk through in their own words, what is that control designed to do? And then we go across the three lines. So to say, okay, well, for the first line, based on those controls that you've just described to me, so tell me what assurances you're getting across those three lines. And it very quickly becomes apparent where the gaps and potential improvements are needed for that. And on the face of it, so if you're looking at this first risk, I would put that as an amber, because you're saying you've got amber, so enough assurance from the first and second line, and actually you've got really good assurance coming from the third line. So if you've got all these controls in place and you're saying that you've got all these assurances coming through, why is it still a red? Which control fundamentally is making that risk a red? What's not working, and what more do you need to do? And because you need to do more, you're almost like then saying, well, why am I putting so much effort and resource into something that's well managed, well controlled, when actually you've got something that's really not controlled at all? So if you look at the risk below, there's far more gaps and improvements sort of identified across all three lines, but we've marked that one an amber. Right, and this isn't real, right? So please don't anybody pick at it and say, oh, that doesn't make sense. This is just like a made up sort of made up two risks, made up the different types of assurances that might be coming, and based on the conversations that you might have with that individual risk owner, where they think this risk lies. But it just demonstrates, even through that initial design effectiveness of what those controls look like, we can still see gaps and improvements. This would then create an action plan for the individual risk owner to take away and sort of work through, actually, what additional things do I need to do to improve the governance and the strength of the controls that are already existing, rather than just ploughing resource into something that you haven't tested. So hopefully from a visual perspective, you can see how this might be helpful, and how this almost lifts where we're getting those assurances from across the first, second, third line, and what more could be potentially done. And then we sort of talk about going into, okay, so what is the sort of the board's role? So this exercise that we've done here, reporting from this should be really sort of going into sort of the board as well. So they would get oversight into this, but I'll talk about the core responsibilities first, and then we'll go into the foresight. So typically your boards will set your strategy and your purpose. They ensure that you've got an effective leadership, and they have that accountability and oversight. So where they manage the risks and controls, they are responsible for setting your risk appetite, right? So if you come to them with an assurance map and you're saying, well, actually, we've got all of these gaps and improvements still that we need to do, have we actually, it sort of starts you asking the question, have we really got the right risk appetite for these strategic risk areas? And are individuals actually applying your 5x5 matrix in the right way? Is this really a red? Is this really an amber? That's where we're talking about managing risks and controls. And they should be able to support your sustainable performance. So they're looking at your KRIs, your KPIs, anything that's relating to sort of like if you're talking about funding, if you're talking about security controls, they would have the power then to obviously say we need a new system. If this isn't right, we're not getting the right level of assurance here. We need this system to talk to these systems. We need to improve efficiencies. We need to stop doing things on a manual basis, because that is what we see as well a lot. You might have an all singing, all dancing system in place, but people will still be using a manual spreadsheet or a manual process to get the job done. But it's understanding. So that assurance mapping piece almost identifies those areas where people aren't potentially using the right processes, but it's understanding why. Why are they not using them? Is it not giving them something that they need? Or actually, do they need more training because they've never been trained on that system? They don't know how to use it. They don't know what the end goal is. So all of that sort of sits in the board's sort of responsibilities. And then we talk about the sort of foresights. So you've got oversight, insight, foresight, and hindsight. So your oversight is that overview in terms of, is everything working as it should be? Your insight is actually looking to see where things could be improved. So, for example, if you take an assurance framework to the board, they get to understand the end-to-end process of what that assurance framework should look like. But because they've got that insight in terms of why things have been set the way they've been set, they can actually then challenge and scrutinise in terms of what needs to be communicated down to the operational levels and what information they need to be able to have that oversight. They also have the responsibility, again, from a risk management perspective, but obviously risk management sits in your governance framework. It's that foresight. So it's looking to the future in terms of, well, what risks are on the horizon for the sector, and how will those risks potentially impact us as an organisation, and then you sort of build that into your insights and how you would set your appetite and the different control levers that you would pull as part of that foresight. And then your hindsight is when things may not have gone so well, or where you're looking at ways of working and lessons learned. So you're actually looking back to understand, this is how we used to do it. This is why it might not have worked so well. And then obviously that again sort of links back into your insight and your oversight, and then forward thinking, this is how we're going to work in the future. So all of those sort of interlink and sort of help support the overall sort of assurance and the governance side of things for charities. And it's just a little bit more of a, everyone has a role to play. So I've just tried to split it down into the different functions across the sector as well. That's it. I might have run through that a bit too quickly, but Emily, I'll let you.
Thank you, Razia. That was really, really informative. And I think it's really clear, isn't it, that one size doesn't fit all. So, you know, it's about tailoring this for your specific organisation. I guess over to you guys, if you've got any questions. Whilst we've got Razia, we're very lucky that she's given up the time for us today. And now's your opportunity to ask her any questions that you may have. I know you've been very thorough, so feel free to pop your hand up, or you know, speak out loud, or pop it in the chat. Graham, I think you've got your hand raised, so we'll start with you. Thanks.
I've just learned how to do that on Zoom. What a great achievement. Razia, thank you so much for that. I really appreciated it. You talked about internal audit. I'm involved in a number of different charities, and we have this vexed conversation about, are we big enough to have an internal audit function or not? And how on earth do you decide, and what do you do if you don't have an internal audit?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And whilst there are different limits in terms of who needs an internal audit and who doesn't, it's best practice. It's best practice to have, because you don't have to necessarily budget as internal audit. You can budget as compliance, but you should have that independent sort of viewpoint in terms of what is working well and where the improvements need. You almost use them as your critical friend, because if you've got an internal audit function internally, and apologies if this is teaching anyone how to suck eggs, it's a case of, well, the internal audit team itself is part of your organisation, right? So they're there to support you and help you embed those policies, procedures. If you've got somebody, i.e. a Bishop Fleming, coming out and doing it, we would get to know you and understand how your processes are designed to operate. And it's that independent assurance that you're somebody completely external coming in to say, yes, you're doing it, it's embedded well. Actually, there are still these gaps that would improve this. And it's sort of benchmarking yourself in terms of what are other charity organisations doing, what are others doing in the sector, what is best practice, because you don't want to be in a situation where you don't have any of that sort of oversight, I guess, and you haven't got that comfort that things are working as intended. But it's not even just working as intended, it's, are they working for what you need them to do, right? And are they protecting you as an organisation and individuals within the organisation as well? Because this isn't just about looking at a financial aspect, it's looking at in like your employee well-being, it's looking at, well, are you a sustainable charity? Are you future-proofing yourself? You know, it's a lot of things that come under that audit umbrella.
Thank you. That was a great response. Katie, I think you've got a question. We'll come to you.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Razia. Thank you so much. That was really, really thorough. I've written pages of notes already. Testing my writing skills. A really, really interesting question around you'd mentioned the kind of core roles of the board being setting the strategy. And I guess I've worked in larger organizations and smaller organizations, and I think sometimes in the larger organizations, it's more been the SLT that have set that strategy and then proposed it to the board for them to approve or feed into, because actually the SLT have had the opportunity to look outwards and have some of that foresight as well. Is that something that you see much? Is that something that is common? Or I guess just wanting to sense check that really, because I'm about to start some work on a strategy, but actually if it's the board's role, I'll step back.
So it goes back to that point around having the tone from the top. So SLT will know the business operationally in terms of what happens on a day-to-day basis, and board have that oversight. But if they're not communicating with them in terms of how their thought process is in terms of setting that strategy, it doesn't really make sense, and it's not connected. And you get to a point where the board will just be, again, sort of signing something off. Do they really understand what they're signing off? And I'm not saying that they're uneducated people and they don't know what they're doing. It's a case of, well, they need to be involved in the process. It's almost like you have that working group session with key stakeholders to say what will our strategy look like or should look like, and getting that individual input. SLT can almost like pull everything together, and board will have that overall sort of sign off, but they need to have some involvement. It's like risk appetite. A lot of the times you'll find like the risk manager or the head of risk sort of setting this appetite or creating this appetite without any conversation with the board. And then it doesn't make sense. And that's why risk managers don't work, because the appetite levels aren't fit for purpose and they're not fit for the organisation.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Razia. We've got a question in the chat there to say, what are KRIs? Is it key risk indicators?
It is. Sorry, apologies. You've got key risk indicators and key performance indicators.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you. Any other questions from anybody else at this stage? No? Well, I think we've all been treated there to some really great information. So, a real big thank you again, Razia, for your time this afternoon. And also thanks to everybody that's joined us. We know how busy you are as charity leaders, trustees and senior leadership teams. So thank you for being part of the discussion. We will send round a copy of the recording and the slides tomorrow. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. And we'll also post a thank you on LinkedIn. So if you've enjoyed today's session, it'd be great if you could like and share that on LinkedIn. It helps with our socials and helps build, better sessions, different sessions going forward. So please do engage with that. And thanks so much.